So let's just get this out of the way right at the beginning. The Greatlance is not a very good weapon at all. And the only reason it isn't good is because spears exist, and spears do everything that Greatlances can do, but much better and faster and lighter and less stamina costy. And really the only thing that lances can do that spears cannot is the R1 into weapon art combo, which, now don't get me wrong, that's extremely damaging, but it's also very hard to pull off for a number of reasons I'll go into later. That being said, just because a weapon is not particularly great doesn't mean you can't kill everyone with it. So I'm going to quickly show you the best way to use the Greatlance, and hopefully it'll make you not die as much with it, because it's definitely hard to use. So the Greatlance is really slow, and it has no hyper armor. So it kind of forces you into one specific playstyle that ends up actually doing really well, although it might not be the most interesting thing in the world. So the main way to use the Greatlance is to bait people into your weapon art. That's it. That is the source of all of your damage. And there are a couple of ways to get people into the weapon art. First off, there is a R1 into weapon art combo. If you hit somebody with an R1, you can follow it up with a weapon art and chain them together for almost 1,000 damage. It does a lot of damage. The thing is, though, this is extremely hard to do for a number of reasons. The first reason that it's hard to do is actually just hitting an uninterrupted R1 on somebody in itself is just very hard. It's like just hitting somebody with an Ultra Greatsword cleanly without trading. You have no hyper armor, so you need to be perfect with your spacing to be able to get an uninterrupted R1 hit. Secondly, you need to be so sure you hit that R1 that you need to press L2 before the R1 even registers damage. So you need to be so confident that your R1 is going to hit that you're pressing L2 before anything even happens. So you can see right here, I do R1, and then right here, I have already begun my weapon art, even though I have not even seen damage register on him, but I'm so confident I'm going to hit him that I start it up anyway. And if you're unconfident and they roll behind you, you're going to get backstabbed. So even though it does a lot of damage, you need to be damn sure that it's actually going to hit. But if you do hit the combo, it's extremely damaging. So another reason that the whole weapon circles around its weapon art is because that's the only thing that has hyper armor. And it has a lot of hyper armor. It has damn near infinite hyper armor. Even with low amounts of poise, you can tank pretty much anything. I've tanked through Great Axes, Onikiri slashes, I've tanked through Ultra Greatsword R2s. You can pretty much not be interrupted by anything once you begin this charge. And that's good. That lets you pretty much outtrade any weapon with hyper armor in the game. All you have to do is just almost read it like a parry. Right as they're beginning their swing, you need to be beginning your charge as well. And it hits so many times that it will stun them out of their hyper armor between their first and second hit. You can't really just tank it and keep going because it hits so many times. So this is why basically the entire weapon revolves around the weapon art and baiting people into the weapon art. So now, if you have somebody with a slow weapon, just starting the weapon art, willy-nilly, it's not going to do anything. They're going to see it and just roll into you and probably backstab you. So you need to play this like you're almost trying to parry your opponent. You need to read what they're doing and then, use the weapon art accordingly. So, for example, in this scenario, I've noticed after I R1, this guy tends to roll at me and then do a rolling attack. Now, I'm two-handing my weapon, so obviously I can't parry, and he knows that, so he's going to keep doing it. So the second time he does it, I do an R1 and immediately chain it into a weapon art. And as he's ending his roll, my weapon art's beginning, and I'm obviously going to poise right through his attack and then just win the trade heavily. So it really is kind of like a parrying thing. If you're good at parrying, you're probably going to be pretty decent with the Greatlance because it's the same type of predicting. Now, the running R1 on the Greatlance is kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, it is the best roll catch in the game if people are rolling directly backwards, and on the other hand, it's the worst roll catch in the game if they roll into you. So you need to make sure that your opponent is a guy that's going to be rolling backwards before you attempt to do this. If you see that they're kind of an aggressive guy and they roll into you, you cannot try this or you're going to get backstabbed. However, everyone panic rolls occasionally, and sometimes people roll backwards, and that's when the running R1 is really good. Additionally, it's much better to start the running R1 when you're a decent distance away from your opponent, not when you're right next to them. You see, if you're right next to your opponent, chances are they're going to roll into you and then just not even get hit. If you start it before they're into you, they might roll earlier, they might roll late, and it has like no real startup animation. It just sort of begins. So you tend to want to start your running attack before you're actually touching your opponent. If you're touching your opponent, even if you hit them, you might just run past them anyway because the stun is not so great. Now, as far as the R2s goes on this weapon, they are completely useless. There is pretty much no reason to ever use an R2. And the reason is the R2 is literally just a weapon art charge with no hyper armor. There's no reason to do it. It doesn't roll catch, it has zero tracking, and if you try to do an R2 and, like they're next to you, they will, just simply walk behind you and you can't turn around that much. And if they're too far away, they'll see the startup and just avoid you. There's no situation where the R2 is ever a good idea, unfortunately. So definitely stay away from those. They will drain all your stamina and get you backstabbed. Now, there are a couple of other interesting tidbits about the weapon as well that I don't really know how to explain. The first one is the double hit phenomenon, and for some reason it happens way more frequently on this weapon than on other weapons. If you guys are unaware, there is a rare glitch in the game where occasionally your weapon will strike twice in like the span of one frame. You can tell this is happening because if you slow down the footage, you'll see two damage numbers quickly add up to an extremely high amount of damage. This can happen with pretty much any weapon, but I've noticed with the Greatlance it happens very frequently, almost like every 3 or 4 duels. It's insane. And I think that has to do with the multi-hit properties of the weapon or something like that. I don't know how to explain it. It is one of those things that we don't really know why it happens, but it does happen. And the Greatlance seems to have it happen very frequently. So that's why if you ever see somebody say, like, I did 900 damage with an R1 on the Greatlance, it's not because they got a counter hit, it's because they got a double hit. And they happen. Like you can see here, I've gotten some pretty insanely damaging hits. And if you slow down the footage, like right here, you can see within like one frame, there is actually 2 hits going on, which confirms the double hit glitch. But the Greatlance, for some reason, I don't have an explanation. It is extremely good at, I guess we'll say, proccing these. It's almost like the thing has like a 10% chance to crit or something like that. It's really weird, and I don't know how to explain it, but it is definitely something that happens fairly frequently, and frequent enough to mention. Some other random things about the weapon. Karthus Beacon and the Pontiff Rings do not proc on the actual charge. Even though you hit like 8 or 9 times during the charge, it doesn't matter. You don't gain any bonus damage, so don't bother with any of those. I've tried it. It doesn't work. Also, remember, the quickest attacks you have are the rolling attacks. The rolling two-handed is the two-handed spear attack, and same thing with the one-handed. Now, the one-handed rolling attack is extremely fast, and the two-handed rolling attack actually has more range than you'd think. So if you are against an extremely reactive player, that might be the only way you're going to reliably hit them, but they are really good if you need a quick attack on the go. And finally, it is possible to roll catch with the basic R1 to this weapon, but again, like the rest of the things involving this weapon, it involves prediction. You would want to R1 like a frame before you believe the roll is about to begin. That is where the timing lies to get a perfect roll catch, so it takes a lot of mastery in predicting exactly when they're going to roll, but if you do time it perfectly, you can roll catch with it just fine. So, that is the Greatlance. It is basically just the let me hit the charge weapon art weapon. And everything else that it does is just simply to bait people into getting hit by the actual weapon art. And that's about it. So if you use this, it's a very simple way to play, but, like I always say, simple is actually usually the best in this game. And that is, I think, the way you will get the most success out of it overall. Now, the sad thing is, I just, went over all this stuff, but Spears can do everything that it can. It can do the exact same thing. In fact, like the Gargoyle Flame Spear, the charge weapon art has the same amount of hyper armor, the same amount of poise, and it also has the amazing spear moveset. And it does more damage, and it doesn't make any sense. So, the Greatlance, without a doubt, needs a buff, or the other spears need a nerf. There needs to be some type of parity, because it doesn't make any sense right now. Maybe nerf the hyper armor on the spear charge, because right now it's the exact same thing, and it makes no sense. But that is the best way to use the Greatlance, guys, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you don't, bash yourself in the face for using the Greatlance. It's kind of fun to use because it knocks them down, and it's, I don't know. It's rewarding to hit people with it, and the R1L2 combos are insanely damaging, but yeah, for some reason, just spears can do everything that they can do better. I think the best change for them would to be do the same thing that they did to maces and give them slight amount of hyper armor at the end. That would put them into the viable category, but right now, it's just kind of completely outclassed by spears. That's it for me, guys. Take it easy, and thank you for watching.